These are the best foldable smartphones in the year 2025. And in this video, I'll tell you which ones are worth buying and which definitely aren't. Alright friends, let's go! Hey friends, this video was translated using AI, so the sound quality isn't the best. If you prefer watching the original video, just follow the link in the description. Meet our contenders: Honor Magic V5, Vivo X Fold 5, Oppo Find N5, Samsung Z Fold 7, and Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold. And rounding out our list is a special guest, the Huawei Mate X Ultimate design, the world's first triple folding smartphone. Alright, place your bets, and we're getting started. Our lineup features 3 smartphones released for the global market: Samsung, Google Pixel, and Oppo. Another 3 devices, Huawei, Vivo, and Honor, were released for the Chinese market. And that's something important to keep in mind. And as always, we're gonna start with the bundled accessories. The Huawei Mate X has the most generous bundle: a charger, 2 branded cables, headphones with extra ear tips, a car adapter, and a high-quality branded case with a pull-out stand. You rarely see a package like this these days, but on the other hand, this smartphone is the most expensive of all our competitors today. But we'll talk about the prices later. The Vivo X Fold 5, Honor Magic V5, and Oppo Find N5 have similar bundles, and those are very respectable bundles too. The boxes include a power adapter, a cable, a case, and all 3 have a screen protector applied. Everything you need to start using the smartphone right out of the box. The cases for all 3 models are excellent, well made, pleasant to the touch, and comfortable in hand. I especially want to praise the Honor. It also has a case with a retractable stand. However, the Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold and Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 have the most modest package. Inside the box, you're only getting a USB-C cable and a SIM card removal tool. No power adapter, no case, no screen protector. This is of course very sad. Now let's go over the dimensions when folded and unfolded. And let's see which of our smartphones is the thinnest and the thickest. In general, when comparing foldable flagships from 2025 with the previous generation, there's a clear trend towards slimmer bodies. For clarity, we've compiled a summary table. As you can see, all the smartphones have noticeably slimmed down. Regarding dimensions, we took our measurements using this electronic caliper. Here's what we got. When unfolded, the thinnest smartphone was the Huawei Mate X Ultimate design. Its thickness in the thinner part is just 3.9 millimeters. The Samsung and Oppo were a bit thicker, about 4.6 millimeters each. Honor and Vivo are the next thickest. Their values are very close. The thickest one turned out to be the Pixel 10 Pro Fold at 5.5 millimeters. The thinnest body when folded was the Z Fold 7. Honor and Oppo were a bit larger, and following them is Vivo. The Google Pixel turned out to be the thickest of the dual smartphone. But of course, the triple foldable smartphone from Huawei is the largest of them all. That's logical. We'll talk about the screen measurements later. For now, let's weigh our smartphones. And here's the picture. The Huawei Mate X is, naturally, the heaviest: 310 grams. Google came in second in terms of weight, 260 grams. Following them are Vivo and Oppo, weighing 236 grams, and Honor, 228 grams. But the lightest of all was the Samsung Z Fold 7. Its weight is just 216 grams. Let's talk about the materials used in our smartphones' bodies and how well they're protected from moisture and dust. 3 smartphones stand out from the rest because they offer versions with leather wrapping. These are Huawei, Oppo, and Honor. However, it's important to note that these options are only available for the Chinese domestic market. You won't find leather variants for global sales. The rest, Pixel, Samsung, and Vivo, use the classic combination of glass and metal. It's very important how comfortably our foldable smartphones open. The Pixel opens easily and comfortably. The bezels are wide, making it easy to grip with your finger. The Vivo has a thin body, so it's more difficult to grip the edge with your fingers. But the protruding button helps us here. The Honor has even thinner bezels, and it's not easy to open it without a case. It's a little better with a case. Oppo's unlocking isn't the most convenient either, but like with Vivo, a slightly protruding button helps here. However, Samsung's body proved to be extremely inconvenient in this regard. The edges are thin, there's nothing to grip onto. It's difficult to open. And finally, Huawei. Despite the triple construction, it unlocks conveniently and easily. There are no problems with it in this respect. Regarding the hinges, Google Pixel, Huawei Mate X and Samsung Z Fold 7 have well-implemented and thoughtfully designed mechanisms. You can open the smartphone even at a 10-degree angle and secure it in that position. The other smartphones have a different hinge mechanism. It doesn't allow you to fix the phone in a partially open state. If you try to open them just a bit, they collapse back. It's important to address the water and dust resistance of the bodies right away. The Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold leads in terms of protection with an IP68 rating, which guarantees complete dust resistance and also water resistance up to 1.5 meters deep. Vivo X Fold 5 is a very close second place. It has the maximum set of IP5X, IPX8, and IPX9 certifications. This means for us that the body is protected from dust, can withstand short-term immersion in water, and is resistant to the impact of strong jets under pressure, including hot water. The Oppo Find N5 also has a high level of protection with an IPX6, IPX8, and IPX9 rating. It's well protected from water but lacks confirmed dust protection. The Honor Magic V5 has IP58 and IP59 certifications, guaranteeing protection from dust, splashes, and jets of water, but with the possibility of some dust entering the body. The Samsung Z Fold 7 is less protected with a basic IP48 rating. It features partial dust protection and resistance to brief submersion. And finally, we have the Huawei Mate X-T. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any protection against water or dust. Now let's move on to the main feature of foldable smartphones, their screens. Obviously, the largest screen when unfolded will be on the triple Huawei. It's a massive 10.2 inches. It feels like a tablet, not a smartphone. All the other smartphones have roughly the same internal screen diagonal, around 8 inches. You're seeing the exact specifications on screen now. The external screens of all 6 smartphones are almost identical. The difference is quite small, ranging from 6.4 inches to 6.62 inches. So there's no significant difference in their sizes. We of course measured the PWM on all the smartphones. And here's what we got. At maximum brightness, the Google Pixel exhibits the strongest flickering. Samsung is a bit better. The Chinese competitors have even lower PWM. Huawei produces around 17%. We can see that Oppo has just 12%. But Vivo and Honor have the lowest values. As brightness decreases to 50%, the situation hardly changes. The flicker on the Pixel 10 Pro Fold is simply outrageous, remaining the most intense of all. Samsung's PWM stays at roughly the same level as at 100% brightness. Flicker levels are slightly lower on the Huawei and Oppo, but the lowest values are found on the Honor and Vivo. At minimum brightness, both the Pixel and Samsung demonstrate a high level of PWM. It exceeds 50% for both. Oppo and Vivo maintain acceptable levels of flickering. And we see the lowest readings with Honor and Huawei. It's only 9% PWM. Based on the measurements, I can say that the Google Pixel has the highest PWM. The situation on Samsung is better, but the least flickering displays we see in Chinese smartphones. So if you have eyes sensitive to PWM, Pixel and Samsung are definitely not for you. By the way, we also measured peak brightness on all the smartphones. However, I'm noting that we manually set the maximum screen brightness. The Vivo X Fold 5 had the brightest screen, measuring 382 nits. Honor came in second for screen brightness. The Oppo Find N5 had slightly lower brightness. Huawei Mate X-T took 4th place with 271 nits. The Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold was next to last. And Samsung had the dimmest screen of all, just 221 candelas per square meter. Is it noticeable in practice? Actually, yes. You can see the difference between the picture quality on all 6 smartphones for yourselves. We specifically ran 8K video everywhere and cranked the screen brightness up to the maximum. You can see with the naked eye that the image on the Samsung and Pixel is indeed more muted than on the others. Let me say a few words about the crease. It's visible on all foldable smartphones. But personally, it's not a critical problem for me. If you're looking to buy a device like this for the first time, my advice is to go to a store and take a look. Feel any foldable smartphones to understand if the crease bothers you or not. What can I say from personal experience? Of course, I haven't used these flagships for an extended period, and I periodically change my main smartphone. I've used Huawei Mate X-T, then switched to a new Samsung, then to Vivo. But nonetheless, so far I haven't had any issues with the folding mechanisms. They're intact, without cracks or bubbles. There's nothing to complain about. The only detail I'd like to highlight here concerns Samsung. All smartphones, except for the Z Fold 7, open up to 180 degrees without any issues. However, when it comes to the crease itself, these smartphones are all pretty much the same. Now let's talk about the operating systems of our smartphones. Let's start with Vivo. It has Origin OS, a fast and pleasant shell, fully supporting all Google services and Android Auto, even in the Chinese version. The system works stably, it's visually appealing, and well optimized for a large screen. The multitasking mode here is arguably the best of all. You can open up to 5 windows simultaneously, resizing them, arranging them side by side, and quickly switching between them. The downside is that it's still a Chinese version. Even when selecting your language in the setting, Chinese characters still appear during system setup. There's also a lot of pre-installed Chinese software. Moreover, most of the AI features are primarily designed for the Chinese market. And there's another weak point with this Vivo version. It's the interaction with Wear OS smartwatches. In most cases, these watches simply won't connect to Chinese Vivo devices. And if you do manage to connect them, it's only through convoluted workarounds. Samsung features their proprietary One UI. The system is stable, fast, and perfectly adapted for the foldable format. The interface is pleasing. There are numerous global AI functions. Full support for all Google services right out of the box. You can open up to 3 apps in multi-window mode. Each one is adjustable in size. Switching between windows is smooth. Samsung, after all, were pioneers in the field of foldable smartphones, and I expected nothing less from them. Let's move on to the Google Pixel. It runs stock Android without any unnecessary additions. Everything works stably. Google services, of course, function without limitations. The smartphone itself offers a number of AI features. In terms of multitasking, there are fewer options here than with competitors. You can only open 2 apps at the same time. Oppo uses Color OS. The system is fast, visually pleasing, and comes with a full suite of Google services. You can display up to 3 apps in multi-window mode. However, switching between them sometimes requires extra steps. Otherwise, it's comfortable to use. The adaptation for the foldable screen is well thought out. Now, about the Otter. It runs on Magic OS. The visual interface is pleasing and snappy, but the Chinese version lacks pre-installed Google services, and the AI features are adapted only for the local market. Part of the interface and apps aren't translated, and Chinese characters occasionally appear. Overall, it's a typical situation for many devices made for China. The split-screen multitasking mode allows you to open up to 3 applications. It works comfortably and reliably. One of the biggest issues with the Otter Magic V5 is synchronization with smartwatches. It's likely due to the Chinese firmware. I would also consider the widget management on this smartphone to be a drawback. Unlike all the other smartphones on the market where you just need to long press widgets, on the Honor you need to use gestures by spreading your fingers apart. You can get used to it, but personally for me, this attempt to stand out seems like a strange and inconvenient solution that's confusing. Now let's move on to Huawei's Tri-Fold smartphone. Here's the installed proprietary Harmony OS. It's a beautiful and smooth system, but limited due to US sanctions. There are absolutely no Google services. You can add them. The process isn't complicated, but the installed apps work unstably. Artificial intelligence and smart services are completely oriented towards the Chinese market. This is the most limited system among all today's competitors. You can display 3 apps on the triple screen in multi-window mode. It's convenient to interact with them. So, what can I say about the OS overall? In terms of ease of use in multi-window mode, Vivo and Samsung remain the best smartphones, in my opinion. The implementation of this mode here is the most convenient, intuitively understandable. Everything works quickly and precisely. On the other hand, the Huawei Mate X wins due to the screen size. It's simply easier and more comfortable to manage multiple windows on it. But if things like having Google services, the absence of Chinese software, features, and smartwatch connectivity are more important to you, then you're better off looking at smartphones designed for the global market, Pixel, Samsung, and global versions of Chinese devices. Let's move on to the heart of our gadgets, to the hardware that powers them. The Pixel features a Google Tensor G5 processor and an AMD DXT graphics chip. Honor, Samsung, and Oppo have identical hardware. A Snapdragon 8 Elite paired with an Adreno 830. Vivo features a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, along with an Adreno 750. The previous generation Vivo X Fold 3 Pro had the exact same hardware. The Huawei Mate X Ultimate design includes a Kirin 9010 and Maliun 910. Let's see how our devices perform in real-world tests. We'll start with an Antutu benchmark. The Samsung Z Fold 7 took the lead with the highest score. Honor, Oppo, and Vivo scored slightly less. The Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold and Huawei Mate X performed the weakest. We also measured the temperature during the test. The Oppo Find N5 heated up the most, showing over 53 degrees. Both the Honor Magic V5 and the Vivo X Fold 5 got quite warm. Both exceeded 49 degrees. Lower the temperature on the Samsung Z Fold 7, just a bit over 43 degrees. The coolest devices in the test turned out to be the Huawei Mate X and the Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold. Their bodies heated up to approximately 41 degrees Celsius. Let's move on to the next test, Geekbench. We'll start with the processors. Samsung leads again. Honor Magic V5 follows closely behind. Oppo Find N5 took 3rd place. Google and Vivo share the penultimate position. They showed very similar results. And Huawei Mate X closes the list, trailing significantly. Now we're testing the video chip performance. The picture here is generally the same as in the CPU test. Samsung once again leads the pack in terms of scores. Honor Magic V5 takes second place, followed by Oppo. Vivo X Fold 5 secured fourth place by score, and Google Pixel and Mate X were once again the weakest devices. But performance isn't everything. Stability under load is equally important. Let's test it in 3D Mark. Here, the speed of the test completion isn't as important to us as the stability and heating. The Pixel 10 Pro Fold performed the most stably. It seems to have a consistent 70%. The Oppo Find N5 proved to be the least stable. We also measured the smartphone's temperature during a stress test. The Google Pixel was the coolest. It recorded around 44 degrees. The Oppo got the hottest of all. Its temperature rose to as high as 55 degrees. By the way, I want to add a couple of words about the Google Pixel. It turned out to be the only smartphone on which it was impossible to install benchmark apps directly from the Google Play Store. I tried through Aurora Store. No luck there either. Simply unavailable for my device. I had to find workarounds. And that's strange, because you can install such apps on regular Google Pixels without any problems. But on the Fold, their installation is limited. A few words about the speakers and haptic feedback. All 6 smartphones have stereo speakers with flagship-level sound quality. I personally liked all of them. Let's take a musical break and listen to the speaker sound. It seemed to me that Samsung has the cleanest sound, while the Google Pixel has the loudest and most bass-heavy sound. At the same time, Huawei's sound felt more compressed with a narrower frequency range. But again, I'm repeating myself. In normal everyday use, I personally like the sound of all the smartphones. But I would especially like to praise the Pixel. In my opinion, it has the most subtle and accurate volume adjustment. You know, it happens sometimes. You need, for example, a balanced sound at low volume, and it's either too loud or too quiet. And there's no optimal middle ground. So the Pixel 10 Pro Fold always has that middle ground, although, of course, this is a subjective observation. However, I do have a Google Pixel, and there's one thing I'm noticing. The bottom speaker is positioned awkwardly. You can accidentally cover it with your finger when using it in the unfolded state, which muffles the sound. I haven't encountered this problem with other foldable smartphones. As for the haptic feedback, I personally found it excellent and pleasant on all smartphones, with no quirks whatsoever. Now I suggest we take a look at how our foldable smartphones perform in the Wi-Fi speed and mobile connection test. Let's start by testing Wi-Fi one by one for each smartphone. The download speeds were excellent for all of them, ranging from 570 to 590 megabits per second. The upload speed was also excellent for all except the Pixel. It didn't even reach 200 megabits, while competitor scores soared past 450 megabits. We also performed mobile network speed tests using the same operator and the same tariff. Samsung Z Fold 7 and Oppo Find N5 performed the best, achieving over 80 megabits for uploads and over 12 megabits for downloads. Honor took third place in terms of upload speed. Vivo performed worse, but Google Pixel had the slowest speed overall, though all three handled uploading almost identically. As for Huawei, we simply couldn't run any tests on it. Every time it just displayed a message saying the network was lost. Let's take a look at battery life and charging. Honor and Vivo have the largest batteries. Huawei Mate X and Oppo Find N5 receive slightly smaller batteries, while Pixel and Samsung have the smallest batteries. Of course, we tested the battery life in practice. All smartphones were charged to 100% before the start of the studio tests. At the end of the filming, we see that Vivo preserved its charge the best. It had a whopping 40% remaining. Samsung, Oppo, and Google Pixel performed slightly worse. Huawei and Honor did the worst. However, I can still cut Mate X some slack. After all, it has the largest triple display and obviously consumes battery more actively than its competitors. Well friends, let's move on to my favorite photo and video testing of foldable smartphones now. I'm going to say right away that foldable smartphones don't exactly shine in their results, because they still have optics that aren't the strongest. Let's start with the optics, beginning with the front-facing cameras. Almost all foldable smartphones have two, one on the external screen and one on the internal screen. The Vivo X Fold 5 has both at 20 megapixels. But compared to the previous generation, these are weaker modules. The X Fold 3 Pro offered both cameras at 32 megapixels. Honor also has comparable optics, with two 20-megapixel cameras pulled straight from the previous generation, completely unchanged. The Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold stands out from the competition because it's the only one to offer dual-pixel autofocus on its front-facing cameras. The camera modules themselves are carried over from the 9th generation, unchanged. Samsung has similar front-facing cameras, but without autofocus, and they're identical to those found in the Z Fold 6. The Oppo Find N5 received simpler camera modules compared to the N3. There were 32 and 20 megapixel cameras. Now both are 8. That's sad. And finally, the Huawei Mate X-T. It also has just an 8 megapixel camera, and it's the only one here. Let's start with selfies. The selfies were taken immediately in portrait mode to check the blurring algorithms. We immediately see noticeable differences in color rendition. Oppo made the skin pinkish and relatively saturated. Vivo's result is more neutral, and Honor's is downright yellow. All three heavily process images with algorithms, but in my opinion, the most aggressive processing is visible on the right. As for blurring, overall they all performed reasonably well. However, Vivo's blurring looks the neatest. It preserved even the fine hairs along the blur's edge, while the competitors simply smeared them over. Let's move on to the second set. The color reproduction is a similar situation. On the left, the skin tones are slightly pink, in the center, they're neutral and more natural, and on the right, they're very yellow. In terms of blurring, Huawei and Samsung did a decent job, but of course, it's not perfect. However, we see the most problematic result with the Pixel. Here, there are the most errors regarding the blur edge, especially in my daughter Maya's hair. In my opinion, the Vivo's front camera delivers the best portrait selfies. It handles the blur edge most carefully, and I like its color reproduction, although, of course, that's always a matter of taste. Regarding front-facing video recording, I would recommend using the main camera array on foldable smartphones to film yourself, as the device's instructions allow for this without any issues. But if we're talking about front-facing video recording, all smartphones allow us to shoot in 4K 60 FPS, except for Vivo. Its maximum video quality is limited to Full HD 30 FPS. Regarding the main camera setup, Samsung stands out from all the smartphones here. It's the only one offering a 200 megapixel main lens. By the way, that's a significant improvement compared to the Z Fold 6, where we had a 50 megapixel base. They've also upgraded the ultra-wide lens. Now it has a larger sensor and larger pixels. However, the telephoto lens is the same as the previous generation. By the way, we also have a review of the Z Fold 6 and several other foldable smartphones from previous generations. The link to that video will be in the description. The Otter Magic V5 is interesting from a lens perspective. The main module remains unchanged, but the ultra-wide and telephoto lenses have been updated. Vivo is also good in terms of optics. It offers three 50 megapixel modules. Compared to the previous generation, the X Fold 3 Pro, the main camera has a slightly wider aperture and laser autofocus. The telephoto lens now has a larger sensor, but instead of 64 megapixels, we got 50 megapixels. The ultra-wide lens received a new focal length of 15 millimeters and phase autofocus. I'd place Oppo fourth in terms of optics. It offers two 50 megapixel lenses and one 8 megapixel lens. Compared to the previous Find N3, this is a blatant downgrade. The main camera received a smaller sensor and aperture. The telephoto lens has been simplified in size and resolution, but the ultra-wide lens suffered the most, from 48 to 8 megapixels. And the sensor got smaller too. In second to last place is the Huawei Mate X-T. It offers us a 50 megapixel main lens. The other modules are 12 megapixels. For the top spot in the main cameras, I'm placing the Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold. It offers a 48 megapixel main camera, a 10.8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 10.5 megapixel ultra-wide lens. These are the same lenses that were in the previous generation of Pixel Fold. Let's move on to real-world tests and start with daytime shooting. Let's move on to portrait photos using the main camera block. At the first zoom level, the differences are mainly in color reproduction. The Vivo produces the brightest result, while the Honor has a darker, more saturated, and more contrasty look. Oppo is somewhere in the middle. At the next zoom level, the color situation doesn't change significantly for the first three. But here we can better examine the blur effect. The Oppo shows very rough errors along the blur boundary, whereas Vivo and Otter handled it well. It's quite neat. Let's switch over. Here, we already see color changes. Oppo produced a warm shot with an orange skin tone. Vivo's skin looks more natural and soft, while Honor's result is the most contrasting and saturated. All three did well with the blur, but once again, I'm praising Vivo for the most precise rendering of fine hairs. Let's activate the second to last zoom levels. Vivo and Otter work neatly with the blur. Oppo shows errors with the hairs. In terms of color reproduction, we see that the X Fold 5 captured a more saturated shot than before. The changes aren't as noticeable in the other smartphones. The Vivo and Honor offer another zoom level. Both do well in terms of bokeh. And noting that the Magic V5 made the skin tone less saturated and more natural compared to previous zooms. Let's move on to the second group. The Huawei delivers the most saturated and expressive result on the main lens. The Google Pixel produced a slightly softer photo, and the Z Fold 7 gave us the most neutral, even flat shot. On the next zoom, the smartphone produced a generally similar processing of the blur boundary. None of them handled it perfectly. There are errors with the hair. For instance, all three blurred a section of hair on the left side of the photo, above the shoulder. We enable 3x zoom. Here, the blurring worked very neatly for all three. And there are no noticeable changes in color reproduction. Samsung offers us another zoom, 5x. Overall, there's not much to add here. A beautiful, neat portrait with neutral color reproduction. Here I again prefer Vivo for its delicate blur and pleasant color rendition. If you like a more saturated picture, then of course, Honor looks more appealing. If you're aiming for minimal processing, then Samsung and Google Pixel deliver softer, more subdued results. Now, let's evaluate the photo zoom. On the ultra-wide lens, there are no differences in the top three, other than color correction. Switching to the main cameras, the only difference here is color rendering. Vivo more accurately rendered the color of the sign. The sign appeared orange with Honor, not red. And Oppo, it's overexposed. Let's turn on 3x zoom. In the first three, the text readability is very good on all the smartphones, but there's a noticeable difference in color reproduction. On the next zoom, the first three smartphones again show a very good result in terms of text readability, but once again we see a difference in color reproduction. And let's look at the last available zooms. The Oppo has the most powerful 120x zoom, and in my opinion, the result is the most refined. Vivo distorts details too much, and Honor's text appeared more blurred than that of its competitors. Next group. There are no significant differences on the ultra-wide lens. Let's move on. We're switching to 1x. Samsung performed the worst here. The sign is overexposed. The text is more legible in Huawei's image, but the color rendition is actually more accurate on the right. Activating 3x. All the images look pretty similar, so we're moving on. Then Huawei performed the best. It has excellent sharpness and detail rendering. The Pixel also has decent text readability, but it loses to Huawei in sharpness. However, Samsung showed the weakest results. Let's move on to the last available zoom levels. We can zoom up to 50x only on the Huawei. Overall, it delivers a readable result, although with very noticeable distortions. As a result of the test, I can say that the Oppo Find N5 performed best in terms of photo zoom. It has the greatest reach and consistently good photo quality. The other Chinese flagships also performed decently, but we see more distortions and shortcomings with them. The Pixel 10 Pro Fold also did a good job, but it significantly loses to Chinese competitors in terms of zoom range. The Z Fold 7 turned out to be the weakest when it comes to photo zoom. Now let's take a look at low-light photography. On the first zoom, Vivo performed the best of the first trio. It didn't overexpose the sign and made it readable. Let's switch to the main lenses. Again, in the first comparison, Vivo performs better. We get a less overexposed and well-readable result once again. Moving on to 3x. Vivo consistently leads in the first group. We can even make out the sign in the photo on the right, but on the left, it's completely blown out. Let's switch to the next zooms. The situation regarding light sources and detail doesn't change here, but what I can note is the strange behavior of the Honor camera. For some reason, the entire image became very dark. And finally, maximum zoom. Oppo and Vivo did great. The text is clear, and the borders are sharp. Honor's text is also readable, but it doesn't look as well rendered as the competitors. Let's move on to the next three smartphones. Huawei performed the best on the first zoom. The text is reasonably readable. The signage is also quite readable on Samsung, but we see quite a bit of noise around the letters. At the same time, the signage is overexposed in the Google Pixel photo. Samsung and Huawei performed well with the main lens, while the Pixel 10 Pro Fold again shows strong overexposure. Let's enable 3x zoom. The Mate X performed confidently here. The signage is readable just as well as on the Vivo. The result from Samsung is weaker and noisier, and predictably, the Google Pixel is the weakest. At the next zoom level, there aren't significant changes. Huawei still outperforms the competitors. Let's turn on 50x zoom on the Huawei. I can say that it handles it quite well. Let's sum it up, friends. The Vivo turned out to be the strongest smartphone in night photo zoom. Oppo and Huawei performed slightly worse, but still quite decently. Honor's results were quite unstable, while Samsung and Google Pixel performed overall worse than their Chinese competitors. Now let's move on to video recording tests. Let's start with regular video recording using the main camera block. The first trio, Oppo, Vivo, and Honor. The Oppo delivers the best level of detail on the ultra-wide lens. Take a look at the tiles and grass, for example. The Vivo and Honor details appear more blurred. By the way, it's noticeable that the Magic V5 has the widest viewing angle. Regarding color accuracy, the Find N5 video is quite warm, and there are noticeable, strange exposure jumps. Vivo produced the darkest and coolest image, while the Magic V5 has the brightest and most yellowish one. We also see exposure fluctuations here, but they're significantly less than on the Oppo. As for stabilization, Oppo holds the image the weakest. Honor did a fine job, and Vivo has an advantage here, as it's centered on the tripod. Let's switch to the main lenses. Again, the video on the left looks the most detailed, and the color reproduction and exposure situation hasn't changed significantly. There aren't any significant differences in stabilization either, compared to previous results. Moving on to the second trio, Huawei, Samsung, and Pixel. Let's look at the ultra-wide lens. The Mate X and Z Fold 7 have very similar video quality, for example, when it comes to the detail captured in tile patterns. The Pixel's image appears softer, but it's noticeable that the ultra-wide lens has the widest viewing angle. The image on the left is the brightest and slightly yellowish, while the one in the center is more balanced and relatively warm. The one on the right is the darkest and coolest. As for stabilization, once again the central Samsung smartphone comes out on top. Both side smartphones hold the image less confidently. Let's move on to One X. There aren't any noticeable changes in detail. Huawei and Samsung produce a pretty comparable picture, while the Pixel noticeably falls behind. Its video looks a bit hazy. In terms of color reproduction, we see some changes. The Mate X has an even higher exposure. The Z Fold 7's video looks a little cooler, and the Pixel 10 Pro Fold, conversely, is more vibrant and warm. The stabilization was the weakest on the video on the left. There's blur and more shaking here compared to the competitors. Let's see how the smartphones perform with video zoom. We'll start with the ultra-wide lens. Oppo, Vivo, and Honor perform similarly here, but for example, the letter M on a white background is slightly more readable on the left and in the center. Switching to the main lenses now. I can't pick a favorite from the top 3 smartphones here. The quality is similar across all of them, and the only differences are in color reproduction. Let's move on to 3x zoom. All smartphones except for the Huawei and Google Pixel activate telephoto lenses here. Oppo and Honor delivered comparable results, but Vivo performed weaker than its competitors. The fine text is noticeably blurrier, for example. Moving on to the next zoom, the results here are quite varied. The Oppo produces a slightly hazy and noisiest image. The Vivo test turned out to be the most distorted, and a dark outline is visible around the text. Honor produced the sharpest and most readable text. Let's enable 10x zoom. The results from Vivo and Oppo are practically unreadable. But with Honor, at least we can make out the silhouettes of the lettering. Let's enable the maximum available zoom. However, unfortunately, 18x on Oppo and 15x on Vivo perform very poorly. Moving on to the second group. On the first zoom, we're looking at the sign again. The lettering is fairly readable from the left, but it gets worse towards the center and right. Now let's move on to the main camera. Huawei and Samsung performed about the same, but the Pixel produced a very blurry result. Let's enable triple zoom. Samsung performed best here, as expected. Only it engaged the telephoto lens at this zoom level. The result on the left is weaker, but the one on the right is the blurriest. Moving on. Here, the 5.5x telephoto lenses on the Mate X and 5x on the 10 Pro Fold are engaged, and the Z Fold 7 already uses digital zoom. The Mate X handled it most confidently again at 10x. The image is weaker on the Pixel, but Samsung has the blurriest result once again. Let's move on to the final zoom. Samsung can zoom in up to 12x, while the Pixel goes up to 20x. But even here, there's no point in such a zoom. The image is very weak. Vivo and Samsung also offer us 8K video on their main lenses. When it comes to the X Fold 5, we see a real improvement in quality when 8K resolution is activated. The picture has become sharper and more readable. Samsung, on the other hand, doesn't show such a noticeable improvement. But in any case, alike to both for the ability to shoot in high resolution. To sum up, Honor Magic V5, Huawei, and Google Pixel performed the best in terms of video zoom range. We were able to read text even with significant digital zoom on those devices. The other 3 smartphones showed a weaker result. They can't boast of such quality. Now let's evaluate video recording in low light. First, we shoot with the ultra-wide. In the first trio, the Vivo performs the worst, and that's under the condition that it's centered on the tripod and has less wobble. We switch to 1x. The Vivo holds the steadiest, but remember, it has a more stable position. Now we move on to the second trio of smartphones. Samsung holds up the best, even though it's on the edge of the tripod. Oppo handles it a little worse, but the shaking in the center is the worst with the Google Pixel. Let's enable One X. And here the results are weak for everyone. We see blurring and shaking everywhere. Now let's see how the zoom performs in these conditions. We'll start with the ultra-wide camera. In the first group, all the smartphones overexpose the sign. However, with the Vivo, we can at least make out the silhouettes of the letters. Now let's switch to the main lenses. In the first comparison, the Honor provides the most detailed image. Even small text is readable on it. With Vivo and Oppo, that same inscription looks blurry, and both videos are quite noisy overall. Let's move on to 3x zoom. Again, Honor provides a cleaner and more readable result, although its inscription also looks quite overexposed. On the other hand, the overexposure is even worse with the competitors, and Vivo also has a lot of noise. Let's move on to the next zoom. Oppo performed the best here with noise reduction, but it lost a bit in detail because of that. Vivo has the noisiest and weakest image. Honor has slightly less noise, and the detail is better. Now let's go to 10x. Once again, Oppo claims the video from noise best in the top 3. Honor's image is also decent, but it's noisier. Vivo's result is the brightest and noisiest. The sign is the most overexposed. The latest 18x zoom is from Oppo, and 15x from Vivo. Here, it's generally the same as the 10x, just with digital crop. There's nothing more to add to what I've already said. Let's move on to the second group of smartphones. On the ultra-wide, the sign is overexposed in all 3 videos. I'll just note that Samsung performs a bit worse in low light compared to the competitors. Main lens. Huawei and Samsung handled this pretty well here. You can even read small text in the results. The Pixel performed the weakest. No one managed to capture the sign on 3x zoom. All 3 results are quite weak. Let's move on. All 3 videos are quite noisy. But with the Google Pixel and Huawei, we can at least make out the back of the chair, whereas in the center, it's completely wiped out. Let's zoom in 10x. The Z Fold 7 handled the sign most carefully here. However, it produced the noisiest image. The Pixel has the most overexposure on the right, but it noticeably has less noise. Huawei's image is the most overexposed here, but there's also less noise compared to Samsung. Here we can zoom in even more. The Pixel has the strongest zoom at 20x. The text is readable but overexposed. Samsung has more refined processing of the signage, but again, there's a lot of noise. Huawei produced the most overexposed result, also with quite noticeable noise. So what's the final verdict? Oppo performed the best. It produced the least noisy and most detailed image. Honor did a decent job too. Vivo wasn't as good. And the phones in the second group showed themselves quite poorly. Well friends, let's summarize the results. And as tradition dictates, we'll start with the prices. Let's take a look at how much the phones cost right now. And I'll also tell you how much I paid for them when they first came out, so you can assess the difference. At the time of filming, the most affordable foldable smartphone from our selection remains the Vivo X Fold 5 with 256 gigabytes of storage. You can find it for $1,080. I, on the other hand, got mine with 512 gigabytes for $1,280. The Samsung Z Fold 7 will cost more. We found it for $1,140. I bought mine for $1,500. Honor Magic V5, a mid-range priced foldable smartphone. We found it for a bit under $1,225. Mine cost $1,410. We're moving toward more expensive smartphones now. The Oppo Find N5 is also only available in the 512GB version. You can get it for $1,325. I have an Oppo released for the Singapore market, and I paid $1,470 for it. The Google Pixel Fold 10 Pro costs even more. Right now, this is the most expensive dual-fold smartphone in our selection. I bought the 256GB version for $1,595. And now you can find the same Pixel for $1,460. But undoubtedly, the most expensive one currently is the triple-fold Huawei Mate X-T Ultimate Design. I bought it in Beijing and paid a crazy amount for it. At the time, I had to pay around $4,900. Now, however, the Mate X-T has become significantly cheaper. You can find it for $2,195. And now, I suggest we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of our foldable smartphones. Let's go from the least popular smartphone to the most sought after. Friends, let's talk about my favorite foldable smartphone. It's the Huawei Mate X-T Ultimate Design, a triple folding smartphone that, honestly, really pleases me. The main plus of this smartphone is its stunning triple screen. It's just gigantic. When I first bought it and unfolded it, I thought that this inner fold would quickly deteriorate, either get scratched, or the entire smartphone would break. But I've been using this smartphone for a year now, and it looks amazing. There are no scratches anywhere on this smartphone. It was very comfortable to use. Watching videos, working, and multitasking are simply excellent on this device. Also, this smartphone has very good cameras. Even considering that it has a large screen, this smartphone held a charge very well for me. If I took it off the charger in the morning, I still had a comfortable 20 to 30% left by evening. And that's with the condition that it has a huge screen. Well, we've talked about the pros. Now let's talk about the cons of the Huawei Mate X-T Ultimate design. And probably the biggest drawback of this smartphone is that you can install Google services as well as other applications. But if they are downloaded not through the native app gallery, you're going to have big problems with updating them. It was simply very inconvenient to update every application you installed outside of the app gallery. I use the Aurora Store app store on this smartphone. This app store has a huge number of different apps that aren't available in the app gallery. I installed new apps from this store, but when updates came out, problems started here. Since each update required pressing several times, granting access to this application to the smartphone, and its HarmonyOS operating system constantly blocked it. In this regard, using this smartphone was incredibly inconvenient, of course. And another drawback, of course, is the weak hardware. For all those people who game on smartphones, and it's quite comfortable to game on this one, it's huge. You know, demanding games probably won't run on it, because the processor here is really weak. Friends, well, and probably the biggest drawback of this smartphone is of course its price. Of all the foldable smartphones we've tested, this one still costs a lot. And considering all the drawbacks this smartphone has, the cost is likely not justified. Overall, I really like this smartphone. And if it weren't for the issues with updating apps that you install outside of App Gallery, I would have happily continued using it. I've been using the smartphone for over 6 months, and honestly, I'm only experiencing positive feelings. Next up is the Oppo Find N5. And I'll say overall, I really like this smartphone. It has a very cool haptic feedback. Actually, Oppo and OnePlus are making some unbelievably pleasant haptic feedback. It was a real pleasure using this smartphone. Another plus, it's the hardware and battery life. This smartphone has really good battery life. It holds a charge very well, and it always lasted me all day. Another plus, it's a global version. And, accordingly, all Google services work out of the box. No tweaking needed, nothing extra to delete. Voice assistants work without issues here. You can safely connect any smartwatch to this smartphone. The operating system also works very well on this smartphone. Multitasking is at a good level too. It was a real pleasure to use this smartphone. Another plus is that they put the ultra-wide lens in the top position in this generation. Yes, it's quite weak, but it's up top. And now your finger won't accidentally cover the lens when you're shooting. Okay, let's talk about the downsides of the Oppo Find N5 now. And the first, probably the biggest downside, is that unfortunately, this year Oppo has worsened their cameras, which was a real surprise to me. It's a really strange situation that the ultra-wide camera on this smartphone, which costs over $1,200, is only 8 megapixels, like on super budget smartphones. And that's of course incredibly unprofessional. This smartphone can only record in 4K 30 FPS on the ultra-wide, and 60 FPS is simply impossible here. In many situations where I wanted to zoom out from the ultra-wide lens and beyond, I simply couldn't, because if you set 60 FPS, only the main lens and telephoto are available. The ultra-wide lens doesn't work. And as you've probably already guessed, another drawback is the smartphone's thickness. It's very thin. It's convenient that they're putting a button like this on the side. With this button, you can easily switch between silent mode, vibration, or sound. It's well designed in that respect. And it's just thanks to this button that using this smartphone is quite convenient. I didn't have any problems unfolding this smartphone, as I always held onto this button and then it unfolds without any issues. However, overall, I preferred the previous generation Oppo. Now let's talk about the strengths of the Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold. And I'd say the most important strong point of this smartphone is its design. I really like the design. It has a very cool back panel. There's fully fledged MagSafe here, which other foldable smartphones don't offer. This smartphone has IP68 protection. Even if it falls into water, nothing will happen to it. And ideally, even if sand gets inside, nothing will happen to it either, which again, other smartphones don't offer. Another huge plus, personally for me. I love foldable smartphones that have an optimal thickness. This smartphone was the easiest to unfold. These phones are very comfortable to use, both the external and internal screens. Another plus, of course, it's the operating system. It's clean Android. It works smoothly, quickly. You can install any apps without any issues. It works flawlessly with any smartwatch. Notifications come through fine, no problems with setup whatsoever. From the perspective of various applications, this is one of the most secure smartphones available for Android. This smartphone has excellent battery life. Since the processor isn't super fast, it easily keeps you going throughout the day. At the end of the workday, I still had 20 to 30% battery left on this smartphone, which definitely makes me very happy. I really enjoyed using this smartphone too. It has lightning-fast screen unlocking. I think this has the most accurate fingerprint sensor built into the power button. It unlocks instantly. And in this respect, this smartphone was very convenient to use. Now let's talk about the downsides of Google Pixel Fold 10 Pro. The first downside, personally for me, is that this year, Google just isn't improving their cameras at all. We had this problem with the Google Pixel 10 Pro XL. They haven't improved the cameras at all compared to the 9th version. And here's the exact same problem. The cameras are weak. Videos recorded on this smartphone aren't very stable. The photo capabilities aren't the best either, compared to other foldable smartphones. Another downside, it has a rather weak processor. And I don't think you'll be able to play demanding games on this smartphone. Another drawback, personally for me, is that the SIM card slot here only allows for one physical SIM card. Thankfully, there's eSIM. But other foldable smartphones that were in today's review allow for 2 physical SIM cards. Samsung and Oppo also have the option to load an eSIM, which is of course very convenient. But unfortunately, here we only have the option of a single physical SIM card and can also connect an eSIM, which in my opinion isn't very convenient. Another downside, when you're using the smartphone and holding it like this, your finger will always cover the speaker, whereas other manufacturers move the speaker, which is located here, to a different spot. Then your finger will never cover it. On this smartphone, I constantly cover the speaker, and you have to retrain yourself to hold it differently. Maybe even holding it like this will be more comfortable, since the aspect ratio here allows you to view content both vertically and horizontally. Friends, but another downside is the price. I bought this smartphone for $1,595, and that's for the 256GB version. Even on the global market, the price of this smartphone is currently the highest of all foldable smartphones, excluding perhaps the Huawei Mate XT. Also, the Google Pixel had the highest screen flicker, which can be very unpleasant for people sensitive to flickering. In the next smartphone, our favorite, the Vivo X Fold 5. I have the Chinese version of this smartphone, but fortunately, on Vivo, you can easily remove all the Chinese-specific features and customize it to your liking, and after that, it works flawlessly. The biggest feature that I really liked on this smartphone is the workspace launch. It's a super convenient thing. You get 5 windows right away. In my opinion, this is the most convenient and strongest implementation of multitasking on foldable smartphones. Another plus, this smartphone has fantastic battery life. It works for a very long time. It easily lasted me a full day, and I still had 20 to 30% remaining at the end of the day. Another point, the hardware here is quite fast, and in tests, this smartphone performed very well indeed. Again, I really love the cameras that Vivo puts in their smartphones. Zeiss works miracles, and this smartphone is no exception. The camera interface is also always a pleasure to use. Therefore, in terms of photography, this foldable smartphone was among the very best. Well friends, we've talked about the pros, now let's talk about the cons. Personally for me, a drawback is again, its very thin body. I've already said that I'm not a fan of thin bodies. This smartphone is also very difficult to unfold. Therefore, personally, I recommend using these foldable smartphones exclusively with the case. It's with the case that they can be easily unfolded and accordingly fully utilized. And I suppose, another drawback, this isn't the global version after all. You can remove all the Chinese elements, but eventually you'll definitely run into problems with some app or other. And unfortunately, Vivo still hasn't managed to fix one key feature I've been eagerly waiting for them to correct in future updates. It's the integration with Wear OS. Samsung watches can be connected to this smartphone, but I haven't been able to connect other Wear OS watches to this smartphone. And of course, another limitation, the AI functions. Since the smartphone is released for the Chinese market, the AI functions are very limited for us. This year, Vivo hasn't improved the hardware of their smartphone at all. They didn't bother to install a new processor here, and that's of course very strange. But the most baffling aspect of the smartphone is the front-facing camera's performance. Even on Vivo's foldable smartphone, you can only record in Full HD with the front camera. That's incredibly unprofessional for 2025, and a smartphone that costs over $1,100. Well friends, let's talk about the pros of the Honor Magic V5. The first thing I liked about this smartphone is that they included a really great case. This branded thing, which allows your smartphone to stand in any position, is definitely a thumbs up from Honor. I hope other manufacturers will also use and include such great cases. Another plus is the hardware and battery life of the smartphone. Honestly, this smartphone worked for me all day long without any problems, and there was still quite a bit of battery life left by evening. In terms of cameras, this smartphone is one of the strongest in our lineup. Now let's talk about the downsides of the Honor Magic V5. And the first, perhaps the biggest drawback of this smartphone, is that I bought the Chinese version. Don't make my mistake under any circumstances. Honestly, the price difference was really negligible. And I have to be honest, a lot here isn't optimized. Compared to Vivo, a lot doesn't work. For example, Android Auto, you're often met with hieroglyphs that you can completely remove on a Vivo. There's nothing you can do about them on an Honor. Another drawback, at least for me, is how thin this smartphone is. There aren't any buttons on the outer screen, and it will be very difficult to grip if you carry it without a case. It's not always easy to open it quickly either. I'm not a fan of very thin foldable smartphones. In my opinion, it's super inconvenient. Therefore, using these smartphones from the unfolding perspective wasn't very comfortable. Another downside of the Chinese operating system. Notifications constantly fail to arrive on my Garmin Fenix 8 watch. It's easy to install the Garmin Connect app on this smartphone and synchronize it with your watch. But the synchronization somehow works very poorly, and most notifications simply didn't reach me. That's precisely why I strongly advise against buying Honor smartphones that are exclusively released on the Chinese market. Another drawback of the Honor Magic V5 is that they place the ultra-wide lens on the bottom. I constantly got my finger in the lens while shooting with the ultra-wide. This smartphone sits very comfortably in the hand. I'm used to taking photos with one hand. And in that mode, you're always going to get your finger in the lens, as the ultra-wide is located down here. And, of course, taking photos with one hand on this smartphone was super uncomfortable. Now, the Samsung Z Fold 7. And I'd say the main advantage of this smartphone is the powerful hardware combined with excellent cameras. It's the only foldable smartphone among those we're testing that has a 200-megapixel main lens. How Samsung managed to do this is a big secret. Fitting such a lens into such a super thin body is quite an achievement. Another plus, it's the global version, and there's no need for any complicated rituals here. Everything works right out of the box. It has incredible AI features that other smartphones still can't offer. Finally, Samsung has expanded the body. Now these smartphones are very comfortable to use with one hand. Sometimes there's just no point in unfolding it. That means you can comfortably type any text with one hand on the external screen, which is of course a plus for Samsung. Another plus, it's the cameras. Both the front-facing camera and the main camera perform very reliably. When it comes to video, this is probably the strongest smartphone of all the ones we're reviewing today. So, we've highlighted the strengths. Now let's talk about the downsides of the Samsung Z Fold 7. And probably the biggest drawback for me personally is that this smartphone has very poor battery life. I've tested a huge number of smartphones, and this is the first smartphone that comes to mind. After charging it from the morning, it won't even last until the evening. This is due to the fact that they put a new, super demanding processor in it, and the battery wasn't improved at all. It has the exact same battery as the Z Fold 6. That's why I personally found this smartphone super uncomfortable to use. If you want to use it constantly, you absolutely need to carry a power bank, or keep it charging periodically, otherwise it simply won't last until evening. Another thing, and this is again my own negative opinion, is that this smartphone has become very thin. For some people, that will be a huge plus, but personally, it's a negative for me. I actually preferred the Z Fold 6. It had a thicker body, and it was more comfortable to open. Yes, this smartphone has definitely become wider, but at the same time, opening it has become much harder. Therefore, I recommend getting a case for this smartphone, and then you won't have any problems with the unfolding. Another drawback of the Samsung Z Fold 7 is that Samsung screens still show a very high PWM value. And for people who are sensitive to PWM, I wouldn't recommend buying this smartphone. Friends, and now the main question. Which smartphone did I choose for myself? And which smartphone do I constantly interact with now? And my answer is the Pixel 10 Pro Fold. I really like this smartphone, and now it has become my constant device, which I will be using in the near future. Despite all the nuances, the Google Pixel 10 Pro Fold is a new experience for me when it comes to foldable smartphones. I'm already quite familiar with the foldable phones from all the other manufacturers featured in our video. I've been using Samsung's Z Fold series since its launch. I've spent over 6 months with the Vivo X Fold 3 Pro, the Honor Magic V2, and the Huawei Mate X-T Ultimate design, so the Google Pixel felt new and interesting to me personally. Friends, and if you liked this video and found it useful, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments which smartphone you would choose for yourselves. And goodbye everyone.